Draft physics video. Yay. Christmas. Sweater. It's really quite hideous. It's teddy bears and actual, But anyway, so, yeah, once a year I can do this. Yeah, I have bigger plans for this video than just comments, but, I figured I'd do some comments. One of them was related, and then there was just some newer ones that are just really uselessly stupid. The ones more recently posted, last 4 hours. Anyway, worst video ever. I don't know what's worse, the audio on the left or the video on the right. Whatever. Yes, the video wasn't perfect. Little tiny bit of echo. Oh my God, end of the world. No, it's really not. You're an idiot. Wasting time. Alright, let's see. So this is again on a Ken Wheeler video. If you knew who he actually is, what he does for who, and why he does it, you would understand he's using this scenario to represent a personal issue. What was the personal issue? He was going to be aborted because he has a bent spine? No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any personal issue here. I think it's just a crock of shit. Anyone who argues for we should make crippled people because one of them might actually do some useful mathematics, it's just an insanely stupid argument. That we should make crippled people when we don't have to make them. That's just stupid. So fuck you, idiot. He goes on to a bunch of Hitler stuff. I don't know what the rest of just useless drivel. Same asshole, 3 comments in 3 different videos. What if you could see particles in motion around you before you knew common the name for it? That's how he wrote it. Before you knew common the name for it. What if others couldn't see something? Well, none of this conversation is about any kind of religious theory. It's a conversation about what the actual evidence is and whether people accurately describe the evidence or inaccurately describe the evidence of experiments. I have pointed out that there's a lot of inaccuracies in how experiments are explained in terms of what the evidence is. And in things like lensing, there's a bunch of omissions where they don't talk about, the fact that there's conflicting evidence. And in the case of wave versus particle duality, there's a complete cop-out where they pretend, to say they'll give some concession to some idea of particle, but it really has nothing to do with what they really want to do, which is to wave everything. So this isn't about what you perceive with your magic powers. It's about what the evidence is and whether the evidence is strong or whether the evidence is weak. And I keep making the point that the evidence for the standard model is weak, not strong. Would you deny reality to accommodate others' egos and inferiority complexes? So again, it's just about whether or not you can accurately describe the evidence, and it has nothing to do with anything else. Fear their retaliation for lack of ability if your knowledge abilities sharing just is whatever whatever this is, bringing a sense of threat to their scientific or corporate existence as lawmakers. So yeah, just totally be irrelevant and meaningless. Thank you. Go away. How many subs are produced by men using varieties of front actors and actresses? I doubt by your persona presented you would accept a name printed in any form as proof. I don't even know what that means. A name printed as proof of what? Since you appear to, I question your existence as a real critique. What? Provide the evidence verifying self as a paid front actor sub. I don't know what this crap is, but you're fucking stupid as fuck. So his name was something like Coffee and Spandex. But not useful. So anyway, this was the comment that was somewhat useful, and somebody responded to it actually kind of agreeing with it, and the guy got kind of pissed off because he didn't like the guy's attitude, so they had a bit of a fight, which was funny. I mean, I'm sorry the guy deleted his post because It wasn't off subject, in my opinion. Hello, Gary. In recent video, I understand you said that you were hesitant to address the standard model. Well, I'm just saying I kind of have enough crap on my table. That's all I'm really saying, is that I've got a new model of gravity. Well, it's a unifying theory, so yes, I have a new model for all the important stuff. And yes, there's this unimportant detail of exactly the mechanism that holds atoms together. And clearly my model would suggest that it's more likely that things aren't spinning around inside of the atom at, 3/4 the speed of light or something. That little electrons have huge momentum. Not likely, in my opinion. Yes, I mean, challenging the standard model in the sense that they don't even put it in the standard model now, right? This is the jive. The talk is there's no such thing as talking about a standard model, because the standard model is now made out of nothing is in absolute positions. Everything's a shell of probabilities. So it's not really a model of anything. It's just some kind of nonsense like, well, it's somewhere in here. Yeah, well, that's swell. Thanks, it's somewhere in here at any one moment. Yeah, that is, so it doesn't mean anything. I mean, they don't, their model isn't a model anymore. So even though they sort of talk about, like it still has that old, Rutherford orbiting thing, they've turned it into a quantum mechanical probability mathematical, it's somewhere in there bullshit anyway. The orbiting electron concept dates to the Rutherford model and appears to be based solely on the already familiar planetary orbits. Yeah, well, that's what I wasn't sure of too, so that's the other reason why I really don't want to get into it, because I don't know exactly what experimental evidence they have for this motion of the atoms, being intrinsic in its function. And so it's hard to argue when I don't have knowledge of all the experiments that might indicate there's some reason they believe this nonsense. Versus a shuddering. I mean, there's clearly an indication that atoms move. They vibrate. But no indication that they have to have spinning bits. Orbiting bits. In my opinion. There's probably no evidence. But the key point here is always to keep reminding people is none of these things can be seen directly. Everything has to be seen indirectly. So you have to create like to measure something's effect, like a P or something. It's a small little thing. To measure it, you have to create a scenario where that little thing causes a big effect that we could see. So it's like building a house of cards. You have to create a bunch of things in a certain arrangement where when the P hits, more action will happen than just the P coming in. The P will just be a catalyst for a reaction that's already set up. So it's like putting the match to the paper. You create a circumstance that allows there to be a chain reaction. And so you're really not seeing anything directly. You're seeing it based on your assumptions about what kind of paper you have and how flammable it is. And then you're saying, okay, we've detected something based on the house of cards falling down, means a P must have hit it. And that's a really indirect and hard way to actually see something, is the argument. So all of this stuff is a little mushy, because whatever evidence there is, the evidence is always circumstantial, not direct. Alright, Mr. Rutherford's theory seems to have been a case of we don't, what else, we don't, and his quote got cut off, I guess, we don't, what else to do with the electrons, but since planets orbit the sun, why not? It sounds good enough for now. So that's the whole quote, but yeah, it's not a very good sentence. The idea seems to have been easy for the public to visualize. Yeah, well, again, you can't fault it as a logical deduction. It works when you're just thinking of these things in terms of gravity and not more complex things like that gravity would be a nuclear force, first off, that maybe magnetism, and I guess the fact that they didn't go with the magnetic model to start with versus the gravitational one, just because magnets already sort of have that appearance of creating tension. Even back in Rutherford's day, they knew you could arrange magnets in an arrangement that would have tension between all the magnets, and it seems like that would have been the more sensible way to describe it. And I think that would have got them a better start with all this energy thing and the idea of increasing the tension between electrons by increasing how far apart they are from each other, and how magnets would do the same thing. That if you had 4 magnets in a tension relationship, so there's a middle magnet that's the positive polarization, you have the outside magnets that are all the same polarization, so they're repelling each other, that you could understand if you shoved an extra magnet into that ring would expand. So, lots of fruitful, I think, ways to use magnetism as the model rather than gravity as the model. Alright, the idea seems to have been easy for the public to visualize. While big science, BS, acknowledges the weakness in the standard model, it doesn't really acknowledge weakness. It's like the video I'm going to play has Lawrence Krauss in it, and he has some line like it's like an abstract painting. It looks good from a distance, but close up it looks like shit. Well, they'll make jokes about their model, but they won't really take it seriously as, that's probably an indication of something's wrong with it. They don't they don't take any responsibility for the fact that their models are ugly when they're really analyzed, and that maybe they should be rethinking these models. It has unfortunately been contaminating the topic of nuclear structure ever since. Your thoughts? Yeah, so I guess I kind of gave my thoughts, but clearly the structure now has been contaminated by all these abstract particles. So the ones that don't reliably exist, you can't see. You put a house of cards up, you don't see them, you don't detect them. You can only detect them in these really, the whole accelerator thing, when you push a ton of energy, move the particles at speeds they naturally probably never achieve, create all kinds of circumstances that aren't very in the environment, and then claim that these little fiery bits that fly off are native things, when they clearly can just be broken pieces, kind of. Little clumps of force, rather than something that's an actual thing that should be identified as an actual thing. They're seeing the same kind of flame, and they're calling a kind of a flame that shoots out from an explosion, and they're giving the flame, an amount of flame. They're calling that a kind of particle. And it just, it could be that bad. So anyway, then he rags on somebody and calls them a douchebag. My comment was addressed to Gary. It doesn't really matter who, so if you make a comment, other people have a right to comment on it. I just let you know. But anyway, I'll just delete that since the other guy deleted his thing. So anyway, that's the comment that I wanted to preface this with, just because these models, these assumptions in physics are just so bad. And so I suffered through this video called The Great Debate, Parallel Realities. Now, it really wasn't about that, but it's about the Higgs, and it's about gravitational lensing, dark matter, and then it's about dark energy, and then it's about what else? Well, then it gets into multiverses too. But this is just all woo science. There's just so little foundational platform for this. And the conversation, you're listening to these people, and they don't give you a model. They don't give you any idea what the hell they're talking about. and in a sense, beyond just saying, look, we got to make up an explanation because something's moving too fast, so we're going to make up, some new thing that's pushing it, instead of explaining why it might possibly another explanation for why it might be going too fast. Like this whole thing with creating this new matter to create gravity in the convenient locations that somehow doesn't have implications, which I still don't think they've been able to do, in any real way, is to defend any of that mush. Interesting. Sorry. The other computer was doing something I found interesting. Yeah. So I, as I've said before, I mean, I have to find a conversation I can have with one of these people who believes this stuff and can defend it. Explain why they think something that has such a weak foundation in evidence, like dark matter, in the sense that there's absolutely no physical evidence beyond this circumstantial problem, where, yes, invisible man solves the problem, but isn't invisible man almost too obviously, like almost a cliche God of the gaps solution, rather than something called a scientific explanation? And this is coming from somebody like Lawrence Krauss, is a big atheist, making the argument that the people are ignorant assholes for accepting these fairy tales. And in my opinion, he's selling science that's just as poorly founded. I mean, they're just Jesus stories. So I thought that would be a good Christmas video, just because these are just fables, essentially. And the lack of any kind of, like I said, there's no explanation. They really don't really explain how, well, we have one phenomenon, there's too much redshift somewhere, and they jump. I mean, just jump to it. They don't even try to explain why there might be too much redshift. Instead of doing that, they just jump to the conclusion that the redshift must be real, in terms of it really means there's this velocity problem that I don't think exists anyway, through anything other than their misinterpretation of not doing the math right, actually. Not figuring out that the thing, presuming it's a contracting object rather than an expanding object, that kind of mistake. But anyway, with galaxies and the speed of the suns inside the galaxies, what they're actually being pulled towards. I don't know if they've ever done that math correctly. I think they do it without considering the environment that each one of those suns are in as a whole environment. They just do it as a collective, and so they don't understand because they're not recognizing the individual circumstances that the suns are in these arms that are of various density and all that stuff. But I don't want to get into all that. But anyway, so it's really thin evidence. It's just really almost a story, and it has the same origin as you could imagine the God theory, where, well, we have a lack of information. We have a tiny bit of information in the sense that this seems too coincidental to be an accident, the stuff that happens. I said the word motherfucker and the next day it hails and kills all my corn crop or something. So we have these coincidences, and then people jump to the conclusion, there must be a God, and he heard me say motherfucker, and that's why, it hailed. Some kind of crap like that happens, and people just jump to these superstitious conclusions, and it just seems like they have the same exact bent. They're just searching, they're jumping to the opportunity to accept the phantasmagorical magic answer, rather than some rational explanation regarding a misunderstanding of what they're actually measuring in terms of redshift or something like that. So tiny bit of evidence, tiny bit of circumstantial evidence, and they're jumping to he's guilty, it must have been him, and there's only just one little piece of circumstantial evidence, and it just reeks of that. And so I figured I'd play some of this crap. And it just is crap, little bits of it here and there. We'll just play it. Because it's just, especially the Higgs thing. So I'll just, just because I probably won't get to all this stuff. But there's a woman who presents on the subject of the Higgs, and she doesn't say a damn thing that anybody could make any sense out of, in terms of explaining what the fuck this thing was and how the fuck they actually detected it. And she talked for 10 minutes, but 15 maybe, and there wasn't, you couldn't make any sense out of it at all. What exactly, and again, the point being made, I'm making is, this force is the, I would argue it's the quantons I'm talking about. It's the little force bits. They're measuring a force, and they're giving it an identity. And they're not, they call it the Higgs particle. They're not detecting a particle. They're detecting a whole bunch of them. So it's a field of these little things. So again, that just sounds so much like my theory. But they never say that, and they never point out how what they're really just talking about is there seems to be some energy that is in the universe that does make things move. It's not a photon. It's something else. So they called it a Higgs. And what it is yes, it's the field energy, but not in the form of a photon with a frequency. But anyway, their explanation, you would never understand how they're getting to measure it, and they don't point out how, no, it's a very indirect measurement. We're measuring an electron moving, or some bigger thing moving, and this has nothing to do with actually seeing a Higgs.
Wonderful analogy. In fact, as far as I know, my colleague, I think Shelley Glashow was the first person that I knew who used this. But because the universe is expanding.
Right, so that's another thing we're supposed to accept, and it's only believed because of one piece of evidence: redshift. So if it wasn't for the fact that everything has the appearance of movement because it's redshifted, or in the sense it's not moving towards us or we're moving away from it, that kind of thing. So everything, they don't have an explanation for why it appears that everything that we look at in the universe is redshifted. Now the first truth is it's not even true, because what you see is a lot of blue shift when they look at the really far away stuff. So so that would indicate stuff moving towards us, things getting smaller, not bigger. But this whole conclusion, this whole redshift thing, again, it just, this expansion of the universe, and this idea that somewhere in this expansion it expanded so fast and so quickly that even the cosmic background radiation couldn't move as fast as the expansion. So the expansion moved faster than the cosmic background radiation, so we could later receive the cosmic background radiation. I mean, it's just such a convoluted story they've written out of one fact: redshift. They don't have any other corroborating reason to believe the universe is expanding except for the existence of redshift. So it's just one piece of evidence, and they've built a whole theory based on it, and there really isn't anything else justifying that explanation. Now, the idea that there was a big bang and that the universe spread apart, I don't even think is a bad idea. I don't even think it's a bad idea to say it might be expanding. But to make this whole, to the theoretical leaps that are made based on just one piece of evidence, no.
It creates a kind of...
I mean, I guess I would argue that if there was a big bang, there was never such a thing as a moment where everything's expanded at faster than the speed of light. That, I would say, is horseshit.
Worlds. Because the fact that it's bigger now, than it was yesterday, and going backwards and backwards and backwards, means that if we look at the largest structures in the universe today, if we go back in time, they were contained all in a region smaller than the size of an atom. And that means if we think about...
So again, that's a completely just a made-up story. I mean, there's just nothing that allows you to presume you could take all the mass in the universe and cram it into an atom. They just made that part up. I mean, there's no evidence that matter does that we could ever compress matter in such a way. So, they've just decided that, well, there's no limits. It's an infinite capability when we don't even know, we have no reason to believe it's an infinite capability to compress matter.
The mysteries of the largest scales we could see, if we go all the way back, they were probably determined by the physics of the very smallest scales. And that's why
well, everything is determined by the physics of the smallest scale. So again, that would just be kind of a silly thing not to understand right from the beginning. That all the physics, all the real interactions happen between electrons, protons, and what I would argue is the variety of different kinds of photon type stuff, the forces. So it's just matter and force. There is nothing else. I'll jump ahead a little because I can't play it all.
Backbone of one of those icicles, if you were a small being there, then the world would seem very strange. One direction would look very different than the other directions. It would just be an accident of your existence.
Again, so this has nothing to do with anything I call real evidence. So obviously we don't know where we are in the universe, and what it appears to be kind of a fact is that our ability to see further is a real limitation on our ability to see, not the non-existence of anything beyond some limit. So they're thinking they're going back in time, and time is getting you can't make this argument that the universe was smaller and that say you can't see the singularity, let's say. I mean, I don't think you can make that argument. So if it came out of something, you'd have to say that, and you were saying you can see back in time, your time would warp into the singularity, so you should be able to see the singularity then, technically. But again, they escaped that option by creating this idea that the universe had 1 millisecond where it zazupled in size faster than the speed of light. Somehow all the matter in the universe moved away from each other at some preposterously ludicrous speed, and therefore we can't see back to the singularity because we can't see through that. There's no photons in the right positions anymore. All the positions of the photons was broken. All the alignments would be broken. Anything traveling across that expansion would be annihilated as a visible footprint of what took place. So I mean, but it's a whole convoluted theory, and it's all based on these little tiny shreds of evidence.
What we've learned with the Higgs particle now that it's discovered is that's why we're here.
Now, another bold statement that the Higgs taught us something, and the Higgs is so critical, and it is some meaningful particle. And it's not a particle in the first place. It's not what they discovered. What they really are measuring is a kind of attraction, repulsion, gravity, magnetism, whatever you want to call it. They're measuring the force carrier that moves other stuff. And they've decided to call that a field of the magical Higgs thingy. But there's no Higgs particle. There's no particle that creates a gravity force. The particle is force. If there is a Higgs particle, it is force. It's not making force. It's actually participating in causing force. It's the background radiation. That's Higgs's.
An accident of our existence. The Higgs field froze in the early universe in a certain way, and somehow...
So, just a whole story, just made up. It froze in some, they had all, there's no evidence of any of that stuff. They don't even have hard evidence of the Higgs itself, let alone all these properties that the Higgs has. This is all just made up stories. This is just a Jesus story.
Particles, as they move through a background field, interact more strongly and act more massive. Other ones interact less strongly and act less massive. It's an accident of our existence. If the Higgs
This isn't even a well-written pile of crap in that sense. Of this accident of creation, like somehow this nonsense would be critical to the formation of matter or something else. Of course, this exact recipe, you can't make a cookie without putting certain ingredients in. But whatever the ingredients you put in, yeah, the dough could rise, and you could end up with some, mechanical mechanisms that are program machines, and you could have chemistry and all that stuff, and they just kind of make it into some kind of, no, it has to be this unique mixture. No.
field wasn't there, the particles wouldn't behave the way that they do, and we wouldn't be.
Yes, if there was no force, then the electrons and the protons and the neutrons wouldn't move, and nothing would happen. That's exactly true. No force, no movement. Yes, forces move material bits. Yes, force bits move material bits. Yes. But all this story you're telling? No. There's bears in the universe, but they don't live in houses and they don't eat fucking porridge, unless it's in somebody's garbage.
That have inspired many of you when you go on the web. This is the Hubble Deep Field. Every dot in this image is a galaxy. We now know there are over 100 billion galaxies in the universe. If you take your hand up on a dark night.
Right, so presumably he'll get to some of these lensed images, hopefully, and that can make a rag about how little evidence they have of that truth.
And hold a dime-sized hole in the sky. If you had one of the largest telescopes in the world, as the type that Wendy is working on, you could see 100,000 galaxies. And moreover, these telescopes have allowed us.
Well, you actually couldn't see them, but obviously some of them are not going to be resolvable as anything. The little speck of light.
Look back in time and far.
So this is looking back in time. So this is one of these images that are the fake. This is lensing, and it's not. Like the lens has different points in the lens that things show up in. It's not spherical like it should be. It disobeys all kinds of logical rules in the sense that there's nothing in this whole field, presumably this thing that's like 1,000,000 light years across, and there's absolutely nothing presumably behind any of this stuff that's visible, that you can see it glowing, and none of the stuff glowing somehow is far enough behind to be caught in the lens, and therefore tremendously exaggerated, magnified in terms of its reality. So it can't possibly be a gravitational lens here, because it disobeys the logic of what a lens would mean of that diameter. So they create this notion of dark matter that fixes the problem by somehow the dark matter knows how to be in a sphere. Somehow it knows we should look round, but we only exist in these little spots where the lensing is happening. We don't exist anywhere else. The dark matter doesn't pull anything together. It doesn't change the function of all these galaxies and how they move around. Somehow it only serves the purpose to create these blue spots in the image again, and you're supposed to be looking into the past, which means they should be redder, not bluer.
Far into the distant past and far, far away, long, long ago. Here is
again says them, and again just logically, like I said, they can't justify it in the sense that they have all this detail in these things that are so far away, and that you can really see little bits of the galaxy. You can even see the shape of a galaxy in these images, and that's in a lens that's supposed to be made out of gravity, which obeys the inverse square law, which makes it impossible logically that you could retain an image focus with using an inverse square law as your lens. It's not going to treat the light properly that you are going to get a resolvable image.
Cluster of galaxies. Clusters are the biggest bound objects in the universe. This particular cluster of galaxies is 5 billion light years away. But you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see these weird blue things.
Yeah, but apparently I don't know what you have to be. You don't have to be somebody logical, right? To believe these fantastic stories. So he just acknowledges they're blue, which is the wrong color. And he did call them blue things, and no explanation about these. The galaxy's 5 billion light years away. The cluster is lensing an image 10 billion light years away. So it's lensing an object 10 billion light years away. And somehow in that whole distance, there's nothing else in the field of view of that lens. No other material objects producing radiation.
Those blue things are multiple images of a single distant galaxy located.
So he just says it like it's the truth. And again, really thin evidence of lensing being first a fact, in that the Eddington experiment that started the whole thing is really, really on thin ice in terms of an experiment. It's really, the tolerances of the experiment are right at the margin of a possibly resolvable, a viewable thing. So it's like having a microscope, and there's a limit to how far you can go, like 1500 magnification or 2000 magnification, and over that everything just goes blurry and fuzzy. And so you could say that yes, we can get right on the edge of that, and that's where theoretically they're right on the edge of the capabilities of even the mathematics working. And the mathematics only works because Einstein presumed that photons are material objects and they're being time dilated, and therefore they're in the gravity twice as long, because they're going the speed of light. And so then that gave the math some hope. So an experiment, I'm just saying, the Eddington experiment, terribly thin margin that it exists on as being any kind of real evidence. And what else do they have except just tying the blobs? They see a blob, they say, well, let's just add that as a gravitational lensing theory, and we won't require it to fit the rest of the logical evidence of what a lens would mean in that location. We just won't pay any attention to the fact that for the footprint to get there, there had to be, certain other conditions that had to exist. They're just going to accept that it's there. So it's almost like, I bring up the OJ trial just because it was funny, but yeah, in one of the slides they were actually showing as evidence of a footprint in cement. So it was obviously made by the guy who cast the sidewalk. So they're showing how, look, it could have been somebody else because there's a different size shoe print. But clearly it wasn't a different size shoe print that could be considered at all rationally as evidence because it's in the cement. It couldn't possibly have happened the night of the crime. And that's what they're doing here. It's, and everybody's just sitting here eating it up and saying, yes, you're all so fucking clever. And these are just God stories. These are just really incredible stories, some of them. I mean, the whole photon going through two slits and all this other crap and the entanglement. Incredibly extravagant stories. And they're not required to produce anything as real evidence. Just absolutely almost nothing as real evidence that is the explanation. And yet he talks as if it's a fact.
It is 5 billion light years behind that cluster. That image is magnified and distorted by space itself. Einstein told us in 1936 that the light bends.
He told us. And that's really what it comes down to. He told a story. He didn't prove the story. And he really didn't. His mathematics don't have anything called bent space in them. They just have this notion that let's turn the inverse square law, instead of explaining the inverse square law with a light bulb or a magnet or some other mechanisms that obey the same rules, we'll just say in this case it's the inverse square law is caused by space bending. So the light bulb doesn't have to bend space to do the inverse square law. My hand doesn't have to bend space, to get 4 times bigger here than here. No space-time had to be created and warped, but this inverse square law, the one that exists around gravitational spherical bodies, we're going to make that one a special thing caused by the bending of space-time. No evidence that that's what did it. No evidence that it's different than a light bulb. We're just going to say it. Einstein said it, therefore it's true. No, it's not true. There's no evidence to prove it. It's just a theory. And in this case, these theories don't sound like Darwin's kind of a theory. Like evolution was a theory until Darwin established a pretty good proof. You know, this isn't even that. This is just a Jesus story.
In a curved space, and space gets curved if matter is there. So the fact that this cluster exists, curved space, magnifying that distant galaxy, and allowing us to actually weigh this cluster. And
so then they'll go a further assumption. So based on their assumption that this is a lensed image, and their assumption that it's 5 billion light years away, and the other assumptions, now they'll say, now we can tell how heavy the galaxy is, and it's all based on no evidence. Just their story, the story they told. So they told the story, and now they're using characters from the story to defend the existence of the new character. So it's like they make a talking chicken, and you know, and then they make the girl chicken, and they make it possible to create the egg and the new hatchling chicken, and it's all made out of the same fairy tale. It's not made out of anything called evidence. Well, let's just do a hair bit more of this. I'm not jumping around much, sorry.
The universe. And we find out most of the mass in that system is invisible.
There, I mean, amazing. So now they found out that it doesn't make sense. They can't see as much mass as there has to be to create this gigantic lens. So this gigantic, preposterously huge lens is just so insanely big. It doesn't make any mathematical sense that this could possibly be happening. So what do? They assume, oh, well then our reality can't be right, that we're actually seeing matter, and so let's just assume we don't see the real matter, and that 96% of the universe is made out of two kinds of dark stuff, you know, dark energy and dark matter, and the universe really isn't made out of stuff, even though we can't find any of it between the Earth and the Moon, even though we can't find of it anywhere in our local neighborhood. Any existence of this magical stuff causing magical things to happen, in the sense that there's nothing irregular. There's nothing happening around Saturn that's unexplainable with regular physics, you know, where we could find an aberration where we could say, dark matter's doing that. We don't even have any circumstantial evidence in our local neighborhood that there's some problem that we need dark matter to solve. So, you know, that's not, this isn't a Jesus story. This isn't just a religious fable being told to people. We've made up a whole preposterous explanation for why there's thunder and lightning. It's because Thor, you know, has a headache and blah blah blah. He's fighting with his wife, and that's what all the noise is about. They're just making up a fucking story. And if you look at the real evidence, there's just tiny shreds. There's just nothing almost that they're building it out of.
It doesn't shine, and physicists, because we have such great linguistic characteristics, call that dark matter.
It doesn't shine, it also is transparent, so it's the invisible man. This is how bad it really is. Dark matter is nothing but saying, I can't solve the crime, the invisible man did it. That's all they're doing. They're saying, I can't find any evidence of who committed this blue streak, this blue blob here, and this one over here, and I don't have it. I can't figure out why it's there, so let's just blame it on Invisible Man. And that's all they're doing. And that's exactly what religion is. It's exactly what religion was. That's its origin, is people just making up stories. Preposterously silly stories of invisible men running the world. And that's what these people have done. They're dark things, and they're Higgses, and they're, you know, just totally undefendable as facts things are controlling the universe. Most of the universe is made out of not real stuff. Stuff we can't see. Invisible man. Most of the universe is invisible man. That's what this guy's saying, right to your face, and you people are eating it.
But what's really neat is we think it's a new type of elementary particle, as I'm sure Frank will probably talk about. And at that
new form of elementary particle, I guess a new form of reality, a new form of force or matter. Yeah. That doesn't show up anywhere else, but where we specifically have a mathematical problem. How convenient.
that's what's exciting.
Like God is only the God of humans, right? And all the other mammals, the great apes and everything else. No, you don't get a God. We only get gods, and we only get to go to heaven, and we only get to play the game, even though they're playing the same brain game that we're playing. You know, how convenient. I mean, it stinks just like a religion. It stinks in terms of the human-centric kind of habit of making it conform to what we want it to be rather than what it is. Alright, jump ahead a little.
Because he discovered, to his amazement and our amazement, that the universe isn't slowing down, it's speeding up.
Alright, so this whole speeding up thing, again, based on just tiny little shreds of evidence. And so what are you going to say? You know, that somehow the explosion is getting more explosive with time. So, you know, they have thin enough evidence of an explosion. But again, there's enough where you'd say, well, it's as good as any other explanation for the redshift. And what do they add to it? They add this special time where in 1 millisecond everything expanded a zillion times. You know, moved more than it moved in the whole history of the universe. It expanded in one moment more than it expanded in the whole history of the rest of the universe. And then they add on top of that silly Santa Claus thing, you know, this whole flying reindeer thing of, you know, now we're going to say it somehow it's expanding faster for some reason. So how do you get an explosion that makes particles move faster as the explosion ages? There's no logic to it. So wouldn't it be something you'd say, why don't we wait until we got better evidence to jump to these conclusions? But no, they just create a new special thing called dark energy. And the dark energy is pushing things apart. And somehow there's more dark energy now than there was 10,000 years ago. I guess.
It's speeding up with a kind of cosmic anti-gravity. How can that be? Well, it turns out that empty space...
It turns out, so he just talks like this is, like we've really demonstrated it, like we've really proven all this stuff with rock solid, big piles of evidence. We got piles and piles and piles of evidence, huge. We got big giant bank vaults full of evidence. We got evidence all over the front. And they have this just freaking so thin, you couldn't even feel it between your fingers. It's so thin, the evidence, for this whole frickin' story.
Can weigh something. That if you actually use quantum mechanics and relativity...
Yeah, so make up the 3 bears and Goldilocks and use them, multiply them times anything. Like Goldilocks, the 3 bears, times glass of water equals dark energy. I mean, yes, anything you put in the mathematics with a silly assumption divided by or multiplied or added to anything is probably going to turn it into crap as a conclusion.
Empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of elementary particles, and maybe empty space can have energy.
Well, at least he said maybe, right? So he said it was pretty definite before, now he goes, oh, well, now I'll use a conditional now. That's kind of funny.
All the particles and the radiation, and it still weighs something. But the problem is when we try and figure out how much it should weigh, the answer we get is 120 orders of magnitude bigger than the number that actually happened. It's the worst prediction in all of physics. And the question is...
yes, the question is why then don't you just say, let's start writing the story over? Because we're on the wrong track. We're a zillion times order of magnitude wrong. You know, Yeah, let's back up and find out where we made our mistake. What assumption was silly?
Will we ever understand that? Why is the energy of empty space both non-zero and so small? It's perplexing us.
Non-zero and so small. So again, non-zero doesn't sound very big to me, right? So what he was really trying to say is it's so huge that it's pushing the universe apart, and yet its mass is so small that we can't account for how it could possibly be doing anything because, it's this. Now, how could the Earth go flying around because somebody did this to it?
That we say maybe. Well, some people have said maybe there are many universes.
Right. So another story, and so he's smiling about this one because he knows, well, that's way out on the wacky limb. So that's a wacky limb in the Three Bears story. So there's a tree, a talking tree, no doubt, a talking apple tree, in the Three Bears story that no one ever mentions. And multiverses are a limb, an apple hanging off the limb of the talking tree. That's how fucking idiotic it is. And he's got a little smirk on his face because he knows this is just complete religion. And here I am, this great atheist, talking about how people should be rational and grounded and reasonable and think about the world based on the evidence that exists and not be making up these silly stories. And here he is just selling the silly fucking story. Storytelling. That's all this is. This isn't science, it's storytelling.
And maybe only those universes that have an energy that's that small allows people to come to Gamage Auditorium. And so maybe even this fundamental parameter of the universe is an
so maybe we just all have to accept the story because we told it, and so therefore that's why we exist, is because dark energy made us exist, because clearly how could you have the Three Bears without the talking tree? Yes, how could it be possible? Yes, it's not possible, you're right.
Accident of nature. We don't know.
Well, he says we don't know. So he says we don't know why this story doesn't make any sense. That's what he just said, basically. We don't know why this apple tree was never mentioned. Why there's no evidence of the apple tree in the Three Bears story, when clearly there had to be an apple tree, because the apple tree actually is where the bears are born, in the roots of the apple tree. I mean, this is just such shit. We don't know. We don't know why this silly story we made up based on little shreds of evidence sounds just as silly as a Sasquatch story, or an Abominable Man story, or a Jehovah story. We don't know why it's just as silly. Yeah, I do. Because it is just as silly. That's exactly what it is. You're just being religious kooks jumping to extravagant conclusions because of a little coincidence here and there. Little coincidence, and all of a sudden there's a sky daddy running the universe, and you're doing exactly the same frickin' thing.
Ultimately, the other aspect of the accelerating universe is that galaxies, as we look at now, are moving away from us faster and faster and faster. And the longer we wait, the less we'll see. Ultimately, all of the galaxies we now see in the universe, in 2 trillion years from now, not for us, but we'll...
Yes, 2 trillion years from now, right. So this is something we should think about or consider as a fact of the universe. Like, oh, how disappointing it is. In 2 trillion years, we won't be able to see Alpha Centauri anymore. Oh, wait a minute, that's an exception, because that one's flying right towards us. Somehow it's violating the rules of flying awayness.
Disappeared. And the universe has become cold, dark, and empty. That's your future.
Again, just a complete fantasy story. Has just no that one again is just so far out on a fantasy limb as just a made-up scenario, having absolutely nothing to do with anything that's been demonstrated to be a reality. I guess I have to jump ahead. Well, I'll play a little more. I mean, I didn't even get to... Well, the guest speakers are they're just silly.
But it tells us that, well, in the far future, observers won't be able to see what we can see now. But maybe we're stuck in that. Maybe we should have a kind of cosmic humility. Maybe there are things we could have seen 5 billion years ago that we can't see now.
We obviously couldn't see all of the stuff that happened in those 5 billion years, so in a sense we get to see more because obviously we see all the stuff that happened between then and now. All the consequences. So the simpler stuff that was closer together is more likely to be less sophisticated and less complicated than the later stuff that had more time to interact. So clearly we are looking at the more interesting universe than would have existed 5 billion years ago. It was a Model A, and we have, Lamborghinis. Alright, jump ahead. So this is the, I'm going to say it, silly woman talking about the Higgs boson, and it's all just silly.
Exists. They can't even find out how mass comes about.
Yeah, they can if they were thoughtful and rational. Okay, well, somewhere I hit the wrong button. My error. So she was saying how, premising the argument that there's always been this mystery about the nature of mass. And again, this word used mass when the real argument is weight in terms of atomic weight, because that's really what mass is. That's what matter is. Matter is made out of electrons, protons, and neutrons, not whatever this crap is they're talking about. Alright, so let me jump ahead to where she's speaking.
Despite that, we did discover the Higgs, of course, which is an impressive feat.
Yes, but you won't explain any of that.
You ask me.
To me, the most unexpected things about the LHC are, first of all, that it works.
Yes.
It's extraordinary.
That it works, so they're presuming that it actually does this thing called work, where they can accelerate protons at these preposterous speeds, and that they're still looking at what happens to a proton when it hits a proton, which is again like me saying if I move a Volkswagen, the speed of light, that they know it's still a Volkswagen, that it's not really just going to turn into a bunch of molten metal.
Very feat of engineering. Secondly, that you can pretty much understand what usually happens there based on the standard model. It works extraordinarily well. And the fact that we can calculate
Okay, somewhere this video switched. How did that happen? So this is the one I haven't seen yet. So this is where they're actually discussing this horse shit. So how did that happen? Did you see that happen? I didn't see that happen. I didn't see where I got to part 2. Because I was doing part 1. Yeah. So that's really interesting.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thanks, Aaron. They're just so full of themselves.
Discovery announcement at CERN on July 4th. We got a letter from Peter Higgs thanking us for his Nobel Prize because he was...
Yeah, so it's just all this, they don't even talk any of the real physics much. They just do all this self-congratulation and, oh, thank you, Peter Higgs for inventing this silly idea so we could verify the existence of the silly tree and the 3 bear story.
The experiment was built underground. There are 2 of them of the general purpose, the Atlas and the compact muon solenoid called CMS, and this is the Atlas one.
So all this stuff that won't tell you anything about exactly what data they actually collect. So again, they always talk to about this data, which is, this is probably the last point I'll make, just because this is going to go on forever. But they always talk about the amount of the data, and they do this the same thing as with the LIGO thing, and that just gives them more ways to make it find a piece that looks like what they want it to. So it's like if I give you 1 billion potato chips, you might find one that looks like Richard Nixon. I give you 1 trillion potato chips, your odds are even higher that you'll find one that looks a lot more like Richard Nixon. It's like finding Mary on the toast. And that again smells just like religion, right? It's the same kind of thing. They're just they're trying to find it. And they just create more data points, just gives them more opportunity just by chance of finding something that fits the pattern they want to find. And this reeks of that being a problem here. Maybe it's not 50%, or I mean whatever. Maybe it's not catastrophic, but it's a liability that they don't even account for being possible. That they have created instruments that create so much technical data that they could find literally anything in that data. It's 10 monkeys typing for 1 billion years, and yes, it wrote some Shakespeare by accident, and they don't even consider that as a possibility.
We think we have answered a lot with the Higgs boson, but there is a remaining set of questions that are showing.
No, there's a remaining huge problem, is that you can't make anything coherent out of all these little bits you've invented. That you're making. The 3 bears have to live in leprechaun land, and it has to somehow connect to, pixie land and fairy land, and somewhere in there, Tinkerbell's castle has to be somewhere. You got so little as a real model, something you could actually call a model of how the universe works.
The mystery of our universe.
Again, this mystery part, when they're supposed to be unraveling the mystery. So the mystery, the people, they're telling the mystery story as if, well, it's just such a mystery because we've now created so many bullshit stories that there'd be a real mystery. Is how could you ever tie all this crap together? These redundant, silly stories.
The universe is not a place.
Real, yeah, that's right. It's not real. It doesn't have real things in it. It's not material. They ought to just rename physics theology, because it has nothing to do with anything physical. It's all theology now.
That we can describe. When I started, I thought I was getting into the point where I would be able to say how the universe started, how the universe.
Why would you even worry about how it started? I don't know why people do that. That's just such a huge jump. You're going to go back, maybe, at least 15 billion years, but the fact is, for things to get 15 billion years apart, it takes a time for them to do that. So obviously, in my opinion, the universe would have to be 30 billion years old just for that to happen. If you don't have your magical expansions, of course. But I mean, yes. So you're gonna go figure out what happened 30 billion years ago, when I think what you should be trying to do is figure out what's happening right now. How does this stuff work that's here? Worrying about how it got here, that's really pushing your capabilities.
It's evolved and where it's going. And the more and more experiments I do, and the more and more I learn that I need to know more before I can actually even comprehend the question.
Right. They can't even comprehend the question now. They're so full of shit. And they have so many fables and stories built into their heads about how the universe works that are completely built on nothing but storytelling, that that they somehow now need more information because they've created such a convoluted pile of crap that there's no way to engineer it. There's no way to fit the blocks together. So instead of the universe being something that's built out of something simpler than we are, they're making it so complicated and so sophisticated and so many elements moving about and so many things doing things that they've made it impossible to resolve. And even if you couldn't understand all the complexity, you should be able to generalize it. And their generalizations are all magical. Entanglement, spooky action, photons aren't really where they are. They're not really in a place. They don't really have a momentum and a velocity. They're not really heading in a direction. I mean, they've turned it all into mush. They've taken all the physics out of physics. And clearly I would offer that if they would have thought about it a little while, like I did, a few years of work, they could have found the real physics. That there's models made out of real physical events that it can explain the physical events. You don't need to create magical answers. You don't need to have talking bears to tell this truth of Wyoming. Alright, anyway, I've gone on long enough, I think. So the part 2 is probably worth playing with, but I don't know if I can stomach it. It's just so hard to accept that they get away with this completely unchallenged. That nowhere in here is the fair representation of some counter argument where somebody gets to say for 5 minutes, you know, they've told you a bunch of stories and they don't have much evidence for any of it, and it is as wacky as it sounds, and it is, and they keep pretending that somehow they've proven the wacky's acceptable. They're giving you these extraordinary explanations, and they're providing nothing as evidence. I mean, literally, there was nothing she provided as evidence that this Higg thing is, and first, a real thing, and second, that it's the thing they think it is. You know. Alright. So, enough. Until the next time. And such. I don't think I have to do anything there. So. You know, I have to get the. It's just. I have to fuck with these lights some. I guess it's this computer screen. I think I have to black it out somehow. Just try to get this, you know, it's a little bit washed out image, so I have to work on that. I'll work on my framing a little as I move out of the frame. But anyway, I'll try to fix some of that. Hopefully the sound isn't awful. I had to fiddle with that, but anyway. Yeah, unfortunately, technical issues to doing this right. You know, getting there.